You're standing in the kitchen, calling your cat's name for the third time. You can see it. It can definitely see you. Its ear even swivels in your direction for half a second. Proof of life, proof it heard you. And then it goes right back to staring at a wall like you never spoke at all. Meanwhile, your friend's dog practically teleports across a room the instant it hears its name, ears up, whole body wagging, ready to die for you on command. So what's actually happening in that cat's brain during those 3 ignored calls? Is it spite? Is it stupidity? Or is it possible? And this is the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little. That your cat heard you perfectly, understood exactly what you wanted, and made a fully informed decision not to bother. Because the science on this is a lot stranger and honestly a lot funnier than cats are just aloof. What researchers have actually found suggests your cat isn't broken, isn't confused, and definitely isn't incapable of listening. It's running a completely different social operating system than the one dogs evolved, and once you understand it, you'll never look at a cat's blank stare the same way again. And before we go further, let's put a number on this because it makes the mystery even weirder. In that same body of research on feline name recognition, cats were shown to reliably distinguish their own name from other similar-sounding words, proving the hearing and recognition aren't the issue at all, which means every single time your cat blanks you, it's not a hardware problem, it's a decision. And figuring out what's actually driving that decision means going all the way back to the moment cats and humans first crossed paths, because the answer has almost nothing to do with your cat and everything to do with a completely different evolutionary bargain than the one dogs made. Section 1. They hear you. They just don't care yet. Here's where it gets interesting immediately. The "does my cat even know its own name" question has actually been tested. And the answer isn't what most non-cat people assume. In 2019, Japanese researcher Atsuko Saito and her team at Sophia University ran a study specifically designed to test whether cats recognize their own names as distinct from other words. Cats were played a sequence of 4 unfamiliar nouns, followed by their own name, all spoken by either their owner or a stranger. The result, cats consistently showed a measurable behavioral response, a head turn, an ear flick, a shift in attention, specifically when they heard their own name compared to the other words. That response held up even when a stranger's voice said the name, which tells you it's not just about recognizing a familiar voice. Cats have genuinely learned to associate a specific sound with themselves. So the science is clear on the first half of this mystery. Your cat absolutely knows you're calling it. The recognition isn't the problem. Interestingly, the same research found that cats living in multi-cat households were somewhat slower to distinguish their own name specifically. Likely because they're constantly hearing several different names called throughout the day and have to work a little harder to filter out which one applies to them. Cats living as the only pet in the house, by contrast, responded fastest and most reliably. Proof that even something as basic as name recognition gets shaped by a cat's specific social environment, not just hardwired instinct. Compare all of this to dogs, where similar name recognition studies show not just faster reaction time, but a much stronger link between hearing a name and immediately orienting the entire body toward the speaker. Ears, eyes, and posture all snapping into alignment almost instantly. Cats show the recognition, they just don't show the full-body commitment that follows it in dogs. And that gap between "I heard you" and "I'm doing something about it" is exactly where this whole mystery lives. But here's where it gets strange. Recognizing your name and deciding to respond to it turned out to be 2 completely separate systems in a cat's brain. And understanding why they're separate is where this whole story really begins. Section 2. The wolf that never fully showed up. Now, here's the part nobody talks about. To understand why cats behave this way, you have to go back roughly 10,000 years to a completely different kind of domestication than the one dogs went through. Dogs were domesticated from wolves through direct active human selection. For thousands of generations, humans deliberately bred dogs for traits like obedience, attentiveness, and social responsiveness to people. Because a dog that ignored commands during a hunt or failed to alert its owner to danger simply wasn't useful and wasn't bred from. Dogs are, in a very real sense, the product of an intense multi-thousand-year audition for human approval. Cats took a radically different path. The prevailing theory, supported by genetic research published by evolutionary biologist Carlos Driscoll and colleagues in 2007, is that cats essentially domesticated themselves. As early agricultural societies began storing grain roughly 10,000 years ago, they inadvertently created a rodent buffet, and wildcats that were slightly bolder around humans gained access to an easy food source while staying wild enough to fend for themselves if that arrangement fell through. Humans didn't selectively breed cats for obedience. They just tolerated the cats that showed up and kept the rodent population down. That single difference in evolutionary history explains almost everything about why cats behave the way they do around us today. A dog's brain was shaped, generation after generation, by the specific reward of pleasing a human. A cat's brain was shaped by a much looser, more transactional relationship. Proximity to humans was useful, but total dependence on human approval never became the survival strategy it did for dogs. There's a physical marker of this difference too, and it's easy to see once you know to look for it. Compare a domestic cat's skull and brain structure to that of its closest wild relative, the African wildcat, and the differences are surprisingly minor, nowhere near the dramatic transformation you see between a wolf and, say, a chihuahua. Dogs have been reshaped almost beyond recognition by selective breeding, both physically and behaviorally, because humans were actively steering that process for thousands of years with a clear goal in mind. Cats, by contrast, have barely changed. A house cat today is remarkably close, genetically and behaviorally, to the wildcats prowling grain stores 10,000 years ago. You're not really living with a heavily modified animal built for human companionship. You're living with something much closer to its original wild blueprint that happens to tolerate, and sometimes even enjoy, living in your house. Section 3. Cats aren't antisocial. They're just not pack animals, but wait, if that's the whole explanation, wouldn't cats just be permanently indifferent to people? Because that's clearly not true either. Plenty of cats are affectionate, seek out their owners, and show genuine attachment. This is where a common myth needs correcting. For a long time, cats were assumed to be essentially solitary animals with no real capacity for social bonding. But that turns out to be an oversimplification based on how we studied dogs first and then just assumed cats would behave the same way, only worse. In 2019, a study led by animal behaviorist Kristyn Vitale at Oregon State University adapted the secure base test, originally designed to study attachment styles in human infants and dogs, for use with cats. The results found that the majority of cats tested showed genuine secure attachment to their owners, seeking proximity and comfort from them, and using their owner's presence as a kind of emotional home base while exploring an unfamiliar room. That's not the profile of an animal incapable of bonding. That's an animal that bonds, just according to its own internal rulebook, on its own schedule, and without the built-in urgency to prove it constantly. The key difference isn't whether cats care about their owners. It's that wolves, and by extension, dogs, evolved in cooperative pack structures where responding instantly to social cues from a group leader had direct survival value. Cats' wild ancestors were largely solitary hunters. There was no pack hierarchy rewarding instant responsiveness to another individual's call because in the wild, a cat mostly only had itself to answer to. Domestication softened that instinct. It didn't erase it. The Vitale study actually broke attachment styles down into categories almost identical to the ones used in human infant research. Secure attachment, where the cat uses its owner as a safe base and calms down when they return. And insecure attachment, split further into ambivalent behavior, where the cat clings anxiously, and avoidant behavior, where the cat actively distances itself from the returning owner. The distribution of these styles in cats turned out to closely mirror the distribution found in human infants and in dogs, suggesting attachment itself isn't some special trait unique to more social species. It's a more general feature of mammalian bonding, one that shows up in cats just as much as anywhere else, even though cats express it through a completely different set of outward behaviors. Section 4. The cost-benefit calculation behind every ignored call now. Here's the part that actually reframes the whole mystery. Because it turns out your cat's decision to ignore you is, in a strange way, a highly rational one. Animal behaviorists studying feline cognition point out that domestic cats retain a strong instinct to conserve energy, a holdover from their solitary hunting ancestors. Where a wild cat might expend enormous effort stalking prey with a relatively low success rate, sometimes succeeding in fewer than 1 out of every 5 attempts. That evolutionary math rewards cats that don't waste energy on anything that isn't clearly worth it. So when you call your cat and it's mid-nap, mid-sunbeam, or mid-staring at a wall, its brain is running something close to a cost-benefit calculation. What's actually on offer here? If the answer is food or a specific sound it's learned reliably predicts something good, cats respond remarkably fast. Studies on cat responsiveness to owners have found cats will often approach within seconds when a name is paired with a known reward, like the sound of a treat bag or a can opener. But if the call carries no immediate learned incentive, the evolutionary math simply doesn't favor getting up. It's not defiance. It's an efficiency-obsessed brain deciding a random summons isn't worth interrupting a perfectly good nap for. Compare that to a dog, whose ancestral brain evolved a much stronger built-in reward specifically for pleasing a human, independent of any tangible payoff. For a dog, your attention and approval often functions as the reward itself. For a cat, attention has to compete against actual variables, food, comfort, safety, the same way it would in the wild. Section 4.5. Your cat might just be busy doing cat things. Now here's the part that nobody talks about. Sometimes the reason your cat isn't responding has nothing to do with social calculation at all. It's simply mid-task, and cats are famously terrible at multitasking once their attention locks onto something. Cats retain an extremely strong predatory focus, even in animals that have never hunted a real meal in their lives. Watch a cat fixate on a moving object, a bird outside the window, a laser pointer, a fly bumping against the glass, and you'll notice something close to tunnel vision take over. Feline behaviorists describe this as a holdover from the intense concentration required for a successful ambush hunt, where a wild cat's survival depended on total focus because any lapse in attention could mean the prey escapes and the cat goes hungry. That same wiring doesn't distinguish between stalking an actual bird and staring intensely at a dust mote floating through a sunbeam. Once engaged, a cat's brain treats the interruption of a human voice as a low-priority background signal, easily overridden by whatever its hunting circuitry has already locked onto. So sometimes the honest answer to "why is my cat ignoring me" isn't philosophical at all. It's simply that, from your cat's perspective, it's currently in the middle of an extremely important imaginary hunt, and you unfortunately are not part of the mission. But what about the clingy cats? But wait, what about the cats that follow their owners from room to room, cry at the door when they leave, or seem genuinely distressed by separation? That doesn't sound like an animal running cold, detached math every time it hears its name. This is where it gets genuinely interesting, because those cats aren't an exception to the theory. They're proof of exactly how flexible feline attachment actually is. Individual variation in cats is enormous, shaped heavily by early life experience. Kittens handled gently and frequently by humans between roughly 2 and 7 weeks old, a critical socialization window identified by feline behavior researchers, tend to grow into adults with significantly stronger, more dog-like responsiveness to human attention. Breed also plays a measurable role. Cats like the Siamese and the Ragdoll are consistently reported by owners and veterinary behaviorists as more vocal, more attention-seeking, and more likely to actively solicit interaction than breeds like the more independent-minded British Shorthair. Environment matters too. A cat that has learned through repeated experience that a specific person reliably provides comfort, food, and safety will show measurably higher attachment behaviors toward that person than toward a stranger or an inconsistent caregiver. In other words, the ignoring behavior isn't a fixed personality trait stamped onto every cat at birth. It's a flexible strategy shaped by genetics, early handling, and the specific relationship a cat has built with the specific human standing in the kitchen calling its name. That 2 to 7 week socialization window is worth dwelling on for a second, because it explains a lot of the variation people notice between individual cats without ever realizing why. A kitten handled daily during that narrow stretch, picked up, spoken to, exposed calmly to different people, tends to develop a lasting comfort with human contact that shapes its entire adult personality. A kitten that misses that window, whether it was born in a barn, a feral colony, or simply wasn't handled much as a very young animal, often grows into an adult cat that's warier of people by default, no matter how much love and patience it receives later. It's not that the second cat is incapable of bonding. It's that the window for building an effortless, instinctive comfort with humans closes fast, and what comes after requires a slower, more deliberate rebuilding of trust. Section 6. The eye contact thing nobody explains correctly. Here's a detail that trips up almost every cat owner, because it seems to contradict everything we just said. Cats that maintained intense eye contact with their owner, then slowly blink, aren't being cold. They're doing something closer to a hug. Researchers studying feline facial communication, including a widely cited 2020 study led by psychologist Karen McComb's team at the University of Sussex, found that slow blinking functions as a genuine affiliative signal between cats and humans. And remarkably, humans who slow blink back at their cat are significantly more likely to have the cat approach them afterward, essentially responding in kind to a shared cross-species gesture of trust. In cat body language, prolonged direct eye contact without blinking is often read as a challenge or a threat, which is exactly why a cat that trusts you will deliberately look away, or blow through a slow, deliberate blink, as a way of signaling, "I feel safe enough around you to lower my guard for a second." Which means the same animal that just ignored your third call across the kitchen might, 20 minutes later, walk over, sit a few feet away, and give you a long, slow blink. And that quiet gesture may carry more genuine emotional weight than an instant, tail-wagging response ever could. It's just not delivered on your schedule, or in a language most people were ever taught to read. There are other overlooked signals too. A cat that headbutts you, technically called bunting, is depositing scent from glands around its face, a behavior reserved almost exclusively for individuals and objects it considers part of its trusted territory. A cat that flops onto its back and exposes its stomach in front of you isn't necessarily asking for a belly rub. In most cases, it's an extreme display of vulnerability, showing you the most physically exposed part of its body specifically because it doesn't feel threatened by you. None of these gestures are loud. None of them come with the enthusiastic full-body performance dogs are famous for. But taken together, they form a language every bit as expressive as a wagging tail, just quieter, subtler, and easy to miss if you're only listening for the human-shaped version of affection. Section 7. The moment that reframes everything, because here's where all of this actually lands, and it's a lot more interesting than cats are jerks. A cat that ignores your call but curls up on your lap an hour later is not so different from a friend who takes forever to reply to a text, but shows up without hesitation the moment you actually need something. A cat that only comes running for the sound of a treat bag is not so different from anyone who's ever been more responsive to a clear, specific incentive than a vague, open-ended request. A cat that slow blinks at you from across the room is not so different from the quiet, undramatic ways real trust actually shows up in any relationship, not in constant, loud reassurance, but in small, deliberate signals offered only when the guard finally comes down. Cats didn't evolve to perform affection on command, the way thousands of years of selective breeding shaped dogs to do. They evolved to survive largely on their own terms, and then slowly, cautiously, chose to let a specific set of humans into that world anyway. What looks like indifference from across the kitchen might actually be the opposite. An animal that never had to bond with you, doing it anyway, entirely on its own schedule. Section 8. So why do cats really ignore their owners? So let's go back to that kitchen, and that half-second ear flick that was apparently the only acknowledgement you were going to get. Based on everything we now know, your cat almost certainly heard you, almost certainly recognized its own name, and almost certainly made a real, if lightning-fast, calculation about whether responding was worth the effort in that exact moment. That's not a broken bond. That's an animal whose 10,000-year relationship with humans was built on choice rather than obligation, running exactly the kind of independent, efficiency-driven mind that choice was always going to produce. The dog down the street will always come running the instant it hears its name, because thousands of years of human breeding built that response directly into its nervous system. Your cat's loyalty works differently, quieter, more selective, and, in its own strange way, more honest. When a cat finally does choose to walk over, sit beside you, or offer that slow, deliberate blink, it isn't doing it because it was bred to. It's doing it because, on some level, it decided you were worth the effort. And maybe that's worth sitting with for a second, because it flips the entire emotional framing of the relationship. A dog's affection, however wonderful, is at least partly the product of 10,000 years of deliberate human engineering, bred generation after generation to need us. A cat never got that treatment. It kept almost all of its wild instincts, almost all of its independence, almost all of its capacity to simply walk away and survive without you, and chose to curl up on the couch beside you anyway. That's not a lesser kind of bond. In some ways, it's a harder one. So the next time your cat stares straight through you mid-call, remember, that's not a broken bond. That's an animal that never had to love you, quietly deciding to anyway.